panel, second panel for today is neurodiversity and navigating education. So we have, missing someone? Who's missing?
I think we're in.
1, 2, 3. Yep. It is 3. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay. We're all here. Sorry, sir. It's been, my brain is about half done with the day already. So we've got Joanna, we've got Fiona, and we've got Jenny joining us today. So should be time. I'm pretty sure we'll have time for questions and things this time. So neurodiversity and navigating education. I thought we could start with all panelists. Me introduce themselves and just say a little bit about what you do. I'm looking at you, Joanna, so if you want to go first.
Thank you very much. And if we do have 4 panelists, I can see a lot of faces in the audience that I recognise, so I think you're the 4th for sure. Yes. So I'm Joanna Hastwell. I work at the university in the Access and Disability and Inclusion team. And we work across all departments, all colleges, and I also work on a national body. So we have our professional body as disability practitioners called the National Association of Disability Practitioners, or NADP. And I've been on that board for about 9 years, I think now. And that adds a lot to our work as a connected force really in the mission for inclusion in higher education, but also some of our work that's further education.
To follow there. Hello everybody, I'm Fiona Kolontari. I'm Head of Student Support and Wellbeing, Inclusion and Disability at University College London. I'm also the Director of the National Association of Disability Practitioners, so Jo and I work together quite often on national projects. Proudly I have ADHD. I only made that discovery, well it was a growing discovery, but officially got that discovery about 18 months ago, and I have dyspraxia. I'm a bit less proud about. I walk into things and spill them a lot.
Jenny.
Thank you. I'm Jenny Gibson, Professor of Developmental Psychology here at the Faculty of Education in Cambridge. I have a fantastic lab, Play Communication Lab. We focus on neurodiversity and human flourishing. Some of the team members are over there, so it's great to have a good showing today. And I'm neurodivergent myself. I'm very interested in inclusion. I also sit on the Office for National Statistics Advisory Board for Inclusive Data.
All right, thank you. So let's start, Joanna, I'm going to pick you again to kick things off. So tell me a little bit more about, in your role, your extensive experience as a disability practitioner. What are some of the key barriers that you notice neurodivergent individuals in academic settings in particular are encountering? Any thoughts or reflections on that?
Thank you. Yes, I think in terms of the barriers, if you think about any protected characteristic under the Equality Act, as we all know very well, the barriers are the same for neurodivergent students. So they sit in those categories of attitudinal barriers, of environmental barriers, of the voice of the individual actually not being in the right room, so not being in the room when decisions are made. And that all in turn, over years of education, has really affected the opportunities that people have had to succeed, to have access, and also just the general understanding and most importantly the value of diversity. So there is, I have seen, a lot of changes in terms of what improves around barriers. And the thing that is improving is that the research that's happening into the area of neurodivergence in education is more often than not now participatory, it's co-designed, it's participatory action research, and that is a massive improvement. It's absolutely essential, and it's, people around here might agree, but it seems to be more commonplace. Like if you go to a talk now, and luckily we can access talks from around the world, around the country, about what researchers are doing, more often than not you've got a steering group with people with neurodivergence on that steering group. So yeah, there's stuff we can look into. Obviously that is a positive spin on what's not happening everywhere, but it is improving. And And the only other thing I would say around the barriers for neurodivergent people is I, being kindly invited to do this talk, has given me an opportunity to stop and reflect on my own journey. So my own journey was being diagnosed with dyslexia at university, and only because I absolutely had to go and have that assessment and get adjustments for my dissertation, I avoided the access services, the disability services, the special educational needs team at all costs, because throughout education for me, when I was in lower school, I found myself in special educational needs rooms. So I was taken out of the general classroom and I was in the SEN room. I think I was quite a quiet kid, but I mostly vividly remember sitting there being perplexed, just really like calmly perplexed at what we all had in common. And what we all had in common is nobody had asked us what we wanted, what mattered to us. And, it's emotional. And, yeah, and I think, in this session here today, we've already started asking people what they want, and that is a big difference.
I think that's a good segue. Fiona, question for you. Can I feel like these things go together. So as head of disability service at UCL, thank you for joining us, coming this way. Yes. In your previous teaching role, supporting teaching academic practice at Wolverhampton, what initiatives have you found to be most effective in supporting neurodivergent students? Kind of leading directly from what Joanna's just been sharing.
Thank you. I think we're on a journey, certainly at UCL and across the sector really, and it's been eye-opening for me, having worked in a number of different universities for different journeys that each institution is on really. What I would say is at the moment, I think it was Hannah this morning, or Elle, might have been Elle, who said that the companies and organisations, they're not where they should be at the moment, and it feels like that. And I think one of the most powerful things is the one-to-one support, and one thing I am really proud of at UCL is the range of one-to-one support. So we don't just do the classic disabled student allowance type, extra skills tuition or mentoring. We differentiate, so we do mentoring for students who are exploring their gender and coming out as trans, and we do mentoring for students that from different cultural backgrounds who may encounter intersectional barriers through no fault of their own, just through the intersecting, the journey that they've been on in terms of neurodiversity, but also English as a second language, and coming to a completely different style of education with a complete loaded set of assumptions that they're having to navigate, and almost a hidden curriculum and the effect that has on people's identities. So I don't think it's good to be fixing students, or I don't see neurodiversity ever as being a problem to be fixed, but I do think there is an emotional soup, which I think people were alluding to this morning, and I think that one of the things that students tell me that is powerful, that they love the most, is that that one-to-one support, the fact that somebody listens, that I matter, that I'm listened to, that I'm asked what I need, that someone can teach me how to advocate in a way that I might never have had. And it doesn't matter if you have a neurodiverse family. My family has neurodiversity as a thread throughout it. But people didn't necessarily have a vocabulary. My dad's in his 80s. I don't think you'll mind me saying it's really obvious that he's got ADHD. But because he's Hungarian and he was a refugee, he, any sort of wildly emotional cultural differences and things like that, which is characteristic of ADHD, were just dismissed as, what's from a different background and things like that. In terms of actually making the most difference and being the most effective, I genuinely think that the work I was doing, whole institution work at Wolverhampton, was making a really big difference. So I had the privilege of working alongside a national teaching fellow on the PG Cert Academic Practice, which is a qualification that all new lecturers who didn't already have a teaching qualification would do. and I taught on an inclusive curriculum design module, and so I wasn't looking at neurodiversity on its own, I was looking at all of those intersecting threads and trying to you've already discovered this morning, inclusion is a really hard thing to teach, right, because one side absolutely doesn't fit all and never will. But the principles of universal design in terms of designing with flexibility for difference and celebrating diversity and recognising that strengths are different for different people, so people need different opportunities to express themselves and demonstrate their strengths in different ways. That was really powerful, and we joined staff and students together, so we had a disability equality action framework. We modelled it on the race equality charter, so we looked at the advanced HE charter, we looked at how can we join the staff and student populations together, because you can't have equality for one group and not have it for another. And you know, for your PhD students, you know, that straight away, you know, they get hit with inequalities in different places because they're you know, they're either both groups or neither. And it was really powerful, and we set, just as I left, I started setting up a disabled student skills so that they could actually be involved in monitoring the institution and feeding back on continuous improvement, and the students get to make some judgments and feedback, which I think is really good as well.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you. And then what we've noticed too with ThinkLab and some of the various organizations we've worked with is informal learning is obviously very powerful. So like we've kind of encouraged things and helped set up things like a buddy system where it tends to be is like you just need to be like one step ahead or half a step ahead. It's the kind of things like I don't want to ask my boss or my supervisor is like I'm afraid about you know seeing whatever, like any number of things. So we found that which is basically what we're all doing together here, is like learning from each other. This kind of informal sharing can be a very powerful thing. So maybe some of that will start sticking together as a result of this. Picking up on a similar one, Jenny, can I ask you, from your own experience as a researcher, academic, can you share some insights on human development and neurodiversity that can help educational institutes better support neurodivergent students?
Sure. Yeah, I think as institutions we need to be asking ourselves, who's not here that should be here? What about those intersections with socio-economic background, with race, ethnicity, other kinds of disabilities, and particularly thinking about Cambridge, incredibly elitist institution despite goodwill from a lot of people, and it's not good enough that we're still quite underrepresentative, I think, from those different intersections of society, and that includes neurodiversity. So I think from our research, looking at educational access and inequalities, it is absolutely essential that we think about these things in that intersectional way. And thinking about those barriers, there's some great work going on exploring barriers to access to higher education. But even things like, if you want to come and work with me as a PhD student, it can be incredibly intimidating to say, well, the process is, oh, you have to just contact this academic out of nowhere with your idea. Is that going to be well received or not? What's the process? What's going to happen next? Nobody quite knows. It's not really standardised, and I don't think those things are helpful, particularly for neurodivergent individuals. So I'd be starting there. And I think picking up on what my colleagues over here have said, taking that systems-wide approach. Again, Cambridge is probably exemplifies institutional fragmentation. We've got all the different colleges, departments, all the different sources of well-being and access, and actually coordinating and working together across all of those to improve access really needs to be done. It's not good enough to say Cambridge is a little bit different. We've done it this way for 800 years. We really need to be radical in the way we're thinking about inclusion, particularly for neurodiversity, and I think that's on me and it's on all of us as a community.
Thanks, Jenny. So let's talk about Cambridge a little bit. So Jenny, Joanna, back to you. How can universities like Cambridge, but all universities, really create a more inclusive environment that not only accommodates, but this is key, proactively and not reactively empowers neurodivergent students and staff?
Thank you. So I think if one of the kind of lessons that we can take is the fact that there's an increase in sharing of information. So there's an increase in students coming forward for support at all universities, and that has been seen as very rapid, and there's been some challenging discourse around that in terms of, do people actually have ADHD? Do people actually have autism? So that's very challenging discourse, and the response to those questions by people in this room and nationally has been really constructive and really clear, rejecting the question around some of that diagnosis. But the increase in numbers at the moment, I'm finding in my role in the university, also in my role on the NADP board, is a response that has really surprised me. So the response has been, so what's reasonable then? And that's not from everyone, and like Jenny said, we're in all institutions, we're full of people that are absolutely outstanding and go and challenge this kind of notion constantly. But we could read the increase in actual figures and data as, oh, look how diverse our students are, oh, look how diverse the student body is and how diverse it's always been. And, oh, right, so there's a value to that, isn't there? There's a really strong value to the fact that we're understanding that better. The data is showing us what some of us have always believed and known, but the data is now showing us. And the thing that is chiming, I think, with a lot of people in kind of decision-making areas is that the response from us as disability practitioners is, and this is how inclusive practice can be delivered. This is when it can be delivered, and this is how it can be delivered. So we've got to move past the Equality Act that says make reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments are not where we need to be. The Equality Act came up with that idea in 2010. It's now 2024, and we've got to be part of the change for acknowledging that reasonable adjustments is not where we need to be. But the barrier to this does come from that lack of understanding and knowledge of what inclusion actually looks like. And the other question that we're getting is, what about academic standards? And that question, I think, can be it is one that needs to be debated. It's one that the response to it, I think, is we need to go back to research, we need to go back to pedagogical research, and we need to say, through that research, let's look at this presumption you're making about the dilution of standards. We're an academic environment, let's have an academic discussion about this as from two disciplines, from the subject area and from our area as experts in this field. Let's discuss it, let's properly debate it, and let's hear your real thoughts. We do want to hear the real thoughts of the academics, and respect that there is more going on. There's a lot more going on within academic departments, pressures that we can ever understand. But if we buy into the fact that cross-department working is the only way to make a change, I think we can maybe have more productive conversations. And then just a couple of examples, I think, where we're talking about who has challenged this notion of academic standards quite well. So the University of Hull has looked at, you might know about this, but they've looked at a competence-based education model, and they have a look at their resources on their webpage, but they're looking at that shift, which a lot of people talk about in education discipline, around the fact that competence-based education looks at the skills, the abilities, the professional experience and knowledge management that you need, and then the method of testing that is where the flexibility comes in. And there's an element of shifting to seeing what part of competence-based education can work in your own institution and being open to that. And then the other example is the University of Leeds are trying to do a lot of work around competence standards. So if you have good knowledge of your competence standards, it's very likely that your academic rigour and the importance of that, which we absolutely agree with, is not going to be challenged in the way you presume it will be, because you know what you're testing, and you really evaluated that, you've been really reflective and critical of your practice and made changes where you know your competence standards, you know what you're testing. So they're just two very tangible examples of things that have been very hard to achieve in those institutions, I know, but they're doing it, and that's great.
Fiona, I want to keep the focus on the so this morning we heard a lot of great examples from advocacy in these sort of in the workplace, from our BBC and Google folks, Joanna and everyone else. Let's keep talking about students, I guess. In your experience, how can neurodivergent students advocate so that they can get the resources they need, the support they need, and even beyond that, picking up on what Joanna was saying, is like go beyond just reasonable adjustments and kind of how can they thrive and flourish in these sort of settings?
Thank you. It's actually a really, really hard question because, you know, part of me thinks, well, actually the admin burden and all the extra stuff we have to do is part of being neurodiverse. Sorry, I use that word. I don't use don't really because it's a personal decision because I don't believe neurodiversity is a deviation from the norm. But I realise that neurodivergent is the preferred term for most people. So please don't be offended on if I use a slightly different term. So yeah, I don't think people should have to fight and constantly advocate for themselves. However, I do think that all of us need to be comfortable and equipped to have a conversation because it doesn't matter how inclusive an environment is. No two people are the same. So, you know, you might have two people who both got diagnoses of dyslexia and autism or ADHD and autism, whatever it might be. But those individuals may actually need quite different things. So, you know, I remember somebody once suggesting, you know, when I was on work, I've got ADHD, you could do this buddy. That would be a nightmare for me. I'd be so distracted, I'd talk their ears off all day, I'd never get anything done. Whereas you might work for a colleague. So I think the journey of self-acceptance and supporting that and creating a culture where people can talk about what they need, whether they've got a neurodiversity or not. Because let's be honest, a lot of people dance on the periphery. You know, I danced on the periphery myself for quite a number of years before I decided to go asking the questions and looking. And it doesn't just involve neurodiversity, it's all those other intersectional characteristics, as you said before. You know, you might feel like an outsider because of your ethnic background or because of your, you know, your social classes and things like that. It's or socioeconomic background. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that it's because of the neurodiversity you're feeling like an outsider. If we can support people on that journey of self-acceptance and we can create an environment that is open and welcoming to neurodiversity, I think that helps. The other thing that I would say that really helped me, you know, personally, when I was sort of coming to terms with who I am, because I think this morning we heard a lot about people on a journey really, and it was a bit like that for me. You know, I've often felt like the outsider, I've often known that I'm a bit different, but not necessarily know why, or have a vocabulary even when I was sort of 18 or 19 years old to say, well, you know, this is going on for me because, to be honest with you, I've always lived my life like this, so I don't know what it all looks like. You know what I mean? I think that how can I put it? So I think if we can help people feel comfortable, navigate that journey. What was I going to say? I'm so sorry, I've had a brain fail. It was about advocating, wasn't it? Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
We can always connect. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think it was about being, you know, self-acceptance, but also just recognising that not everybody will have the vocabulary at a point in time to describe what they need. So just being really tolerant of difference.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
Completely went down the rabbit hole.
I think a lot of what you're saying is very important and powerful about it's isolating, feel like a lonely, alienating kind of experience, which is very heartening and kind of exciting that it's something that, okay, yeah.
If you can find your allies, if you're not necessarily feeling necessarily comfortable in your own skin and you're trying to decide actually is this a safe space where I can share who I am or not, finding allies, and there might be people that look and seem a little bit like you, but they might not be actually, and in my case they weren't. So, you know, my biggest ally was a professor who came out and said, you know what, I'm dyslexic. And actually that really transformed things for me, because then I could see that actually she was brave enough to say that. She changed that space and she made it acceptable, and she said, you know what, I could be successful, and actually I'm successful not despite my dyslexia, but because of it. And actually I was really lucky. I went on to have that person as a thesis supervisor, and she really helped me see that ADHD can be a research strength, and that actually a lot of us that maybe didn't really fit the mould earlier in our education, as education becomes a bit more narrow, a bit more focused, as you become researchers and you have a bit more control and choice about what you're doing, actually some of you will really shine and come into your own in a way that you couldn't before. Thank you.
Jenny, this was a good segue to you to ask you another question about, based on your own personal and professional experiences, and in your role as a professor here at the university, speaking of allies, things like that, what have you, any thoughts, like key challenges that academics face when supporting neurodivergent students?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of challenges. I think one of them is around kind of knowledge and disclosure. That can be very difficult for anybody, and that burden of disclosure can present a barrier. You know, there's a simple thing to change about what I'm doing that could help. You know, it helps for me to know about it, and how we have those communication systems set up is really important to enable that. So I think on the sort of flip side of seeing that as a barrier, if we can change our practice to be more open, more welcoming, and maybe having anonymous suggestion boxes, that's really helpful for things that can be done. As for systemic barriers, I think the pace of academic life is incredibly difficult, and that's something I found throughout my career. And I guess I remember feeling as a teenager that I was just on this conveyor belt and I couldn't get off, and I didn't know how it all worked, and it felt really confusing, and I just needed to hit pause. And the hit pause for me was quite catastrophic at that point. Now, if I'm having the same feelings and I've realised to recognise them in an academic context, I can sort of step in to self-regulate and to understand what I need to do in those situations. So I suppose when those barriers are there, having a very deep self-understanding is important, and that peer network to support others to build up that self-understanding. I'm working a lot at the moment with self-determination theory. I don't know if people have come across this, but it's a psychology of well-being theory, and it has kind of, well, it has many components, but one of the key bits that I really like is this sort of tripartite model of mastery, autonomy and connectedness, and having those in the balance that works for you. So where is your competence? And actually, maybe one of the joys of academia is that you get to be a massive nerd. You know, so much of this, you can really dive into the things that really energise you and give you joy, and you can build that competence. And providing those kind of opportunities for my students is a real priority, as well as for me in my academic research. But also recognising that we don't do these things in a vacuum, so that connectedness comes in. Who are your people? Like, find them out, find peer networks, and maybe some of the barriers come in around like finding your tribe, those people you connect with. I think that's really important to have that social, whatever that looks like in the form for you, that social aspect. And then that autonomy about making decisions for ourselves. And again, there are systemic barriers to autonomy in academia, particularly because it is a very hierarchical place. But I think finding those little moments where you can exercise and recognise that autonomy, and for those of us in more senior positions, fostering that in others and making those opportunities, I think can really make a positive change.
Let's talk about NAPD. I was going to do that. NAPD a little bit. So first question, Joanna, and then followed by Fiona. But Joanna, for you, tell us a little bit more about your work in NAPD as chair for continued professional development.
Thank you. So NADP is our, for disability practitioners in higher education, is our professional body really. It's our the body that connects it's a membership organisation, so it connects anybody that's practising in the area of inclusion and access for students. But it's a membership organisation. It's got a voluntary board that runs it and a very small staff group. But one of the elements that I work on is the professional development. So we have accreditation for disability practitioners, but we also have opportunities to pull together people from different organisations and put on, luckily now we've got online webinars 5 times a year, which has really escalated the reach that we can have. And this is a bit of a appeal to you all in this room. With those webinars, we are trying to pull together not just our own community, but actually reach out and get the voice of people in different industries that have got the same agenda around inclusion, equality, diversity, to come together and present that. So that also reaches out to the academics. We're trying to include more and more academics in our webinars to make sure that we've got, disability practitioners have got the voice of the academics when they're trying to do that consultancy work out in departments and out in different disciplines. So if anybody is doing a piece of research and part of that it would be valuable to you, it definitely would be valuable to us if you would like to come and present at one of our NADP webinars. So please do get in touch. Let me know, or I can share the details of the actual organisation and get in touch with them directly. It's good work.
Yes, great. Second question. So Fiona, over to you in terms of how does NADP empower and guide disability practitioners to better support neurodivergent students in higher education?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think Joe's already talked a little bit about some of the things we do in terms of webinars. I think the most powerful thing that we're doing at the moment is that we've realised that not enough of the material out there at the moment engaged in living experience. So you've got an awful lot of experts in the field talking about a disability or a neurodiversity or a particular thing from their own perspective, but not engaging plurality, so not engaging with different people who experience that particular thing, and also people who identify themselves within that group. And so all of the training webinars that we're doing, we're trying to incorporate that living experience. So we did one, I can't remember, was it about a year ago on ADHD, and we made sure that it was actually led by people who got ADHD, we just sort of gave it over to them to sort of say, well, actually fill this space, what are the things that you want people to know, because everything out there is so deficit based when we looked into it. And off the back of that, we developed a course, and we also another course for practitioners, and we also have quite a successful autism course as well. I can't remember what it's called, so a bit about it.
Yeah, so the autism course and our ADHD course, and this is another part of NADP. It's actually got a big liaison with government. So, like the Department of Education has an advisory group looking at support for students, and NADP is positioning itself more and more as an expert organisation that can inform and contribute when decisions are being made. And recently there was a call for evidence around non-medical helpers through disabled student allowance and mental statistical tutors. And our chair of NADP went and attended the parliamentary discussion on it, and did an incredible job at trying to represent the views of the sector. But I guess that's another thing that is quite important to the work that they're doing, is that they are a voice around big decisions and change.
I feel that's summarised it really well. I would say to all of you actually, whether you're partway through your university journey or psychology, or whether you're from the community and you've got young people in your family going to university, if you want to, you can respond to that call for evidence about non-medical health. I think it's open until the first week in July, I think. And I think it's really important that people defend it, because actually I'd love to see a sector that doesn't need specialist working with students, and the focus is the specialist work with the colleagues out in departments and teaching and learning. But we're not quite there yet, and I think these professionals who work on a one-to-one basis with students are so important, but we're worried about it being eroded because the numbers of students coming through who are sharing the neurodiversity is higher. So obviously the bill associated with that support in terms of the pressure on the public purse is becoming more extreme. So I'm reading this call for evidence perhaps unfairly, and I'm talking as me, not as a UCL person or an NADP person, but as a parent of a young person who's about to go to university, I see it as being an opportunity that people are looking to try and cut funding, but actually I see that support as being a lifeline for a lot of people.
One more individual question for you, Jenny, and then let's make it a little more interactive. So audience people, invite you to have questions. If you want to share things, let's talk a little bit together, and then we can kind of wrap up, and then we'll do a comfort break after this. I forget how long it is. Everyone has the program in front of them. We will do a comfort break for 10 minutes. I hear clanking outside, which means there's new coffee and tea coming, and then we will do discussion groups. Jenny, one more question for you, if I may. How can universities better support academics and inform them about the diverse needs of their students? Kind of a broader picture question.
Great question. I think a lot of partnership working, so working with colleagues in the Accessibility and Disability Resource Centre here at Cambridge is really helpful. We've just started conversations around programme level conversations around that with colleagues there. And I think having somebody in every faculty whose job it is to oversee what is happening, keeping track of student numbers, keeping track of inclusive practices in the department, and asking those questions. What are the resourcing needs that we have, and meeting those resourcing needs? Because quite often, all too often, you see a situation where perhaps one or two people will be carrying the burden of inclusion for all kinds of different things in the departments, and then guess what happens? Those people burn out, right? And actually having a good idea of what finances are needed, what training, who's keeping up with it, whether that kind of dialogue with the student body about whether those needs are being met in the ways that students need and expect, because of course there's like generational changes. So there's partly that communication, but some part of it's hard cash allocated too.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Let's open it up a little bit. Does anyone in the audience, totally optional, would anyone else like to share, have any questions or thoughts thus far? I'll do it quick. I'll be the roving mic person. Here then.
I really just want to say thank you to all of you, because it's really it just makes a massive change at Cambridge to have actually people speaking about this, because I mean, basically everything is in recognition, but particularly about finding tribes and things like that. The people that I've really become friends with recently are almost all neurodiverse or neurodivergent, how we able to use the term. And there's one that I know in particular at the moment, I don't think I won't mention her name, but she basically, she, just because of the, I think someone called it the burden of inclusion, she has developed not only glandular fever but also tonsillitis, and she's doing her final exams right now. She just finished, but I think the fact that Cambridge didn't do anything to allow her to like actually recover from physical illnesses that have been brought on from like many different things, but mainly severe ADHD and like some people PTSD too. And I think it's just really important that we do like allow students to just be students and have people that are there for us. So thank you for.
Thank you for sharing. Yes.
Probably got a loud enough voice. Thank you, Basil. So I used to be a teacher. I was a primary school teacher for about 9 years, and then have been at the university for nearly 6, which is why you all go, wow. Obviously, with children, that's where we should be looking at focusing on support. And in the time that I was a teacher, EHCPs were being slashed, special schools were being closed, it was every child in the classroom, and we couldn't meet the needs. and there were more and more children being excluded from the classroom, so they were in school every day with the funding and everything else that's happening. What is some practical can-do advice that I can offer parents, carers, my ex-teacher colleagues, of things that they can do? So we have neutral classrooms and try and make things, but there's no money and there's no time. It's a big battle, and I know that there's probably a long picture, but what are the things that can practically be done right now?
Did anyone want to comment? Yeah. Fiona, Jenny.
I only raised my hand because it's the answer to this question.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm a mother of a 6-year-old who is not officially diagnosed. I'm not entirely sure we're going to go down that way. She started showing some features at the age of 3, so we know something is going on. For that reason, going through the pain of diagnosis.
Well, they're no longer, so EHCPs, so Cambridge Council were told that it would be slashed by, it was like 3/4. So now you're not going to get an EHCP if your
That's
child's
exactly it. I see it coming, and I happen to come from a culture where for instruction, we experienced a massive collapse of the social provision system, i.e. healthcare and social provision. So, sorry to say, I've seen it happening. It's happening in this society right now. I know that the generation of my daughter will not have that funding. So what we had done in terms of practically, first of all, we deferred her by a year. She started reception a year later. And we put together private provision for speech and language therapy. And I just had this wonderful conversation with a clinical psychologist who says, find her tribe as early as possible, where she is accepted for what she is from early doors, and help her form a self-valued identity, self-determination theory. You mentioned those big three. That's exactly what you and I talked about. I recognize them. Autonomy, competence, and connectedness. And I'm afraid it's grassroots. It's every parent.
But you're in a fortunate enough position where you do have that resource and that network. A lot of the time parents aren't aware, or it's a genetic issue, not an issue, but it's genetic, and the parents are just, it's a bit of a quirk. So how would, a teacher...
I can only tell you what happened when our system collapsed. People were left to provide for themselves, and they self-organized in small support groups. And it turned into grassroots. When big system collapsed, small system form instead, and something eventually emerges. But ultimately, I think parents of children like mine will have to self-organize at grassroots level. But it's important that they understand that essential thing you told me. They need to find the tribe. This is where it all starts. Without that identity that I'm a valued individual, forget fighting for the societal acceptance that the society has to move for me. Just find a little society, a little tribe where they are accepted for what they are. And that will save their sanity. I'm already seeing it. So for once it was.
Thank you. Yeah. Other thought? Yeah.
I'm a parent of a young person with an ADHD, and actually the reason I've gone into this career pathway, my previous career was my undergrad in animation, and I worked in the creative industry. And the reason I trained as a dyslexia tutor and then went into sort of disability and inclusion working was actually because I needed to get the badge as a parent. It's really obvious that I've got a child who's dyslexic, and I remember just saying to the nursery teacher, well, I think she's dyslexic, and she's too young, but anyway, she's bright, so she's not dyslexic. And I just, internally crumbled, and I was just like, okay, so this is not a conversation. The conversation is not going to go anywhere with you at this point, because you've clearly got some strange beliefs about neurodiversity straight away. And even though I wasn't an expert in the field at all at that time, I knew there was something not quite right with what was said to me. What I will say is, EHCPs are absolutely painful process. I understand why people go through them. I understand why people want the piece of paper. It has not done everything that we wanted it to. The Equality Act applies whether you have an EHCP or not. I do feel for primary teachers. I've worked I'm unusual. I've worked in every stage of education, from nursery to university. I've done mix, I've done adult ed, I've done every single stage in between. And what I will say is, generally, teachers are not well supported. So there is a thing called the CAST, Universal Design for Learning Framework. It's designed for higher education, but actually I think a lot of reception class teachers and nursery teachers are masters of inclusive education. They build and nurture the independence in the children. They start to get them to organise stuff. You watch a nursery teacher and how they operate and how they get children to navigate a space and how they give them outdoor time and they navigate their well-being and they encourage them to take turns and things like that. They're masters of it, and we lose that somewhere along the way. We shroud everything in you know, fancy pedagogical language. Different things come into fashion, different things go out of fashion. So I've seen phonics come in. I now see, you know, I remember just thinking, because even though I'm ADHD, I've got some phonological processing difficulties, which I didn't know about until fairly recently. I learnt to read by visually, you know, that's what the word looks like. So I remember thinking, if you've got a toolkit full of 20 things, okay, most people might prefer this particular thing, but why are we throwing all the others out? And now I think things are coming around that way. But a lot of education is driven by money. What resources can we sell? What book can we sell? You know, you see these people fighting for, you know, on the next big name in, you know, the theory of what dyslexia is, I'm going to sell this thing, and then somebody else will come up with something controversial, a bit like a Farage type approach, which is, you know, I'm going to say it's not a thing, and then people will buy my book or read my article. And it's really frustrating. The Equality Act applies no matter what. So if you see a need, if you don't need a piece of paper, the Equality Act in the recent, very sad Bristol case, very recently, shows us that you don't need a piece of paper. If the need is obvious, then the need should be met. And if I'm honest with you, that applies to all children and all people. So I always think of my neurodiverse students as being canaries in the coal mine. So when people used to dig a new shaft or whatever, they would send the canary down. The canary could sing and they knew that the people were having enough oxygen to breathe and things. If you get it right for those people and those children, you get it right for the others as well.
Thank you, Fiona. I think it's difficult because the Equality Act does apply, the Children's and Families Act does apply, but often it is not applied, and actually there's a huge issue in special educational needs and disability that these laws are flouted with impunity quite often. So I want to be optimistic about that, and I think it does apply, but how we get it to apply in practice is a really difficult challenge. And I think primary school teachers and early years specialists and secondary teachers too, they're often at the very sharp end of all this. Oh, we've got a mental health crisis, well, we'll do something in schools. Oh, there's a eating disorders crisis, oh, we'll tackle that in schools, and it piles up and piles up. So I think encouraging teacher well-being is absolutely critical to this. Teacher well-being, teacher training, and as you were saying, fostering that natural creativity and inclusion that people go into teaching because they've got that heart for, and really recognising that is critical. Practically speaking, I reckon my colleagues' resources, so the Belonging in Schools resource from Duncan Astle's lab, learning about neurodiversity in schools as a whole school approach to neurodiversity in primary schools from University of Edinburgh. Alyssa Alcorn and colleagues would recommend that. And here at the University of Cambridge, if you sign up for our PEDAL, Play in Education Development and Learning newsletter, we've often got webinars and trainings and best practice discussions there, but I do recognise that it's difficult out there. Thank you.
Could you just repeat those, the last one you said?
Duncan Astle's Belonging in Schools resource, and then learning about neurodiversity in schools, that's Leans, that's Alcorn and colleagues from University of Edinburgh. And then if you go to pedalhub.net, that's the University of Cambridge Centre for Play in Education, Development and Learning. And for neurodiversity specific stuff, you can go to my lab, which is paclab.co.uk.
Just a very quick one, and I don't think this is an instant thing at all, and Jenny's definitely touched on this, but at Cambridge we are now, with our PGCE department, have for their PGCE students, they have training around diversity and disability and inclusion as part of their track course. But I don't think that's a national thing in PGCE courses to the extent that it needs to be. Some of the weightings of those modules maybe do need to be looked at, and that is a shift, and that is a point at enabling our next generation of teachers to have the support and understanding of what they can do in the classroom right from the point of training. So that's just a small